Hey scholars, during this week's self-paced learning, we are going to be looking at characters in a story and looking at their decisions, their thoughts, their actions, things that they've done, and thinking about what we can learn from those characters. So during our teacher model today, we're going to be looking at our book, Mr. George Baker. If you remember, we read this book last week, and it was about an older man and his neighbor, Harry. We're also going to be using a circle graph. This paper is in your reading and writing folder. If you'll pause your video and grab this out of your folder, as well as a pencil to write with. The next thing we're going to do, scholars, is write our name as well as our character's name. So at the top, we need to write your first name. So Miss Esther is just going to write Miss Esther. But you would write your name. And in the middle, we are going to write Mr. George Baker. And the reason we're going to write Mr. George Baker is because this is the character that we are going to be focusing on. Okay? Now, you might be asking, what are we going to be doing with here? So here, we are going to be writing some things that maybe would describe Mr. Baker, okay? Not what he looks like. We know he's old. We know he's tall. We know he's brown, right? Those are his outside features. We want to really think about things that he does in the story, okay? So go ahead and fill out this, and then we're going to get busy reading our book again. All right, here we go. So I'm going to read, but as I read, I might stop occasionally, and we're going to write a couple things or maybe even draw a picture on our paper, okay? If you need to pause the video at any time to get caught up, you do that, okay? Just make sure you hit pause, write down what you need to write down, and then hit play to continue. Mr. George Baker. See this man? This one here, sitting on the porch? That's Mr. George Baker, and he's 100 years old. No kidding. Hurry up, Harry. Mr. Harry in charge. That's George. All snappity and happy in the morning. He always calls, hurry up, Harry, when I'm crossing lawns, his and mine, and he's always the first waiting on the porch. So one thing I see right here about Mr. George Baker, I might on my paper, I think I might put the number, I just might write the number 100. And that just might remind me that Mr. George is pretty old. I think I also might draw a little smiley face because Mr. George looks like he's happy. I think I might write that word here too. Happy, right? Or the word happy. I might also write the word big smile. Okay? And those are words that would describe Mr. Baker so far in our story. All right, let's see what happens next. See his pants, all baggity, baggy. What holds them up? Suspenders. Brown, baggy pants with 2 side pockets and 2 in the back. There's candy in those pockets, little chocolate candies in twisty silver wrappers. George pops one in his mouth, and I do too. We wait on the porch and chew. I like his crumpled hat and his long, stretchy legs. His shoes are crumpled too, with long shoelaces. Mine always come undone in the morning. Let's have a look, says George, making 2 double knots that never come undone. See this man, this one here, zipping up his book bag? His book bag is red, like mine, and there's a book inside. Now, there's an example on this page of George helping Harry. George helps Harry tie his shoes. He puts them in double knots. So I might write on my paper right here that Mr. George is helpful. Helpful. And the example of that would be him helping Harry tie his shoes. Okay, let's go to the next page. But George can't read. 100 years old and he never learned to read? That must be corrected, says George. Okay, so here we learn that he can't read. Okay, so I'm just going to put the word read right here. And I might draw a circle and put a line through it. That means he can't do it. But look at this sentence right here. That must be corrected, says George. That word corrected means he wants to fix it, right? Okay, so I'm going to put here that I know that George is also a hard worker. Okay, hard worker. To be 100 and not know how to read, would take a lot of work to be that old and learn something new. I really like his sweater, all hangy with 3 buttons. It's chilly in the morning and we both hug our knees and wait. We wait, watching leaves blow off trees. They fly for a while, they float, they tumble for a while, they swoop. So here they are, waiting on the front porch. Now the screen door opens, creaks, and you know who teeters out? Miss Baker, and some people say she's 90. Well, here you are, Harry, looking after my George. Miss Baker puts a sack on the step beside George, and there's lunch in the sack for later. For the man I love, says Miss Baker. Here they are. Why, Miss B, you flatter me. George gets up all crickety and slow, and the next thing you know, they're dancing. When Mrs. Baker gives a wave and a wink, goodbye, she says, be good, she says, and goes back in the house with the purple shutters. So I think I might just draw a heart here and write the word love. Okay, I think Mr. Baker is a loving person. We see that he loves his wife, right? He loves Mrs. Baker. He loves to dance, right? If you remember, he also loves to play the drums. George Baker and me, George Baker and I, we sit on the step and wait. Side by side, we wait. Now, we talked about this in class. We know they're waiting for the bus, right? See these crickety fingers? Good tappity on his knees. They fly across his knees. Tappity boom, tappity boom, tappity boom, boom, tap. George Baker is a drummer, and some people say he's famous. Sometimes he drums on his porch at night, and the neighbors come by. Up the road and down the road, they come to hear my drummer man. Okay? So you might even over here, you could write that he loves music. So why don't we do that? What are the things that he loves? He loves his wife, right? He loves to dance. And he loves the drums. So now we've learned a lot about Mr. Baker. Seems like a pretty happy guy. All right, let's see what happens. Shh, listen. George gets up real slow. I take his hand and he takes mine, and we shuffle down the walk to the big school bus. Morning, says the driver. We've been waiting, says George. There are 22 kids on this bus, plus 4 grown-ups on this bus. They all want George. Over here, they cry. Sit here, they say. But George sits with me each and every day. See this man, this one in room 7? That's Mr. George Baker, and he's 100 years old. No kidding. He's learning to read with the grown-ups in room 7, and my room is right down the hall. I'm learning too, and it's hard. We can do it, says George after school. Our books are green, and his lips sound out the letters real slow, but his fingers fly across his knees like a big old drum. Tappity boom, tappity boom, tappity boom, boom, tap. So I could also write down here that Mr. George Baker, we're going to put never gives up. Okay, so let's just review what we have so far. I wrote that Mr. George Baker is happy. He has a big smile. I also wrote that Mr. George Baker is 100 years old. Mr. George Baker is helpful. Remember, he tied Harry's shoes. He can't read. He's a hard worker. I think that one can kind of go with this one, right? That he loves his wife. He loves to dance. He loves drums. And he never gives up. All right. You probably need to pause the video to make sure you get this information written down on your paper. Okay, now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Okay, we need to think about all of these things about Mr. Baker and ask yourself, what is something that I can learn from this character? Okay, what can I learn from what the character did, the words that he said, the choices that he made? What can I learn? You might also remember us talking about things when we talk about the word theme, okay? The theme means the message, okay? So we learned about this a few weeks ago during our remote time. Theme means the message. What can we learn from George Baker? Well, I think being a hard worker and never giving up is definitely a good thing for the story. So in this part, the square part, any of these, the corners, you can write your answer over here, you can write your answer down here or down here, but it needs to be outside here. So let's just write, I'm going to say Mr., I'll just turn my paper so I can write Mr. Baker taught me to never give up, even when something is hard. So from Mr. Baker, I learned that I need to never give up, even when something is hard. Okay? So he was 100 years old and trying to learn how to read. That's really hard, guys. So I think that's a good lesson that we can learn from Mr. Baker. Okay? So you want to make sure you get all this filled out. You can pause the video at any time, but fill this out before you go to your next part of this self-paced learning.